I want to ask you something before we start. How many AI tools are you actually paying for right now? Almost everyone I talk to uses ChatGPT. It's the name people use when they mean AI, the way Google became the verb for search. My mom knows what ChatGPT is. My cousin who still uses Internet Explorer knows what ChatGPT is. And yet, when I started looking more carefully at where I actually spend my time and money across AI tools, I realized something uncomfortable. I drifted, quietly, without really noticing. ChatGPT was still open in a tab, but it wasn't the one I was reaching for when something actually mattered, and I wasn't alone. A few weeks ago, some financial data leaked out of OpenAI. Revenue numbers, loss numbers, margin numbers. When I dug into them, along with everything else happening at the company right now, I stopped and thought, this is a much bigger story than the benchmarks and the product launches. So today, I want to walk you through exactly what's going on with OpenAI and ChatGPT. Not the hype, not the panic, just the actual situation. What the numbers say, what the competition looks like, and what I think it means for you as someone who uses these tools. In June, OpenAI's 2025 financials leaked to the Financial Times and Fortune. The headline number is not the revenue. The headline number is the loss. $13.1 billion in revenue. $20.9 billion in operating loss. For every dollar OpenAI brought in last year, it spent more than $2. I know what some of you are thinking. Startups lose money, high-growth companies lose money. That's how tech works. And you're right, that's often true. The question is always whether the losses are shrinking as you scale, because at some point, revenue has to catch up. Here's the problem. OpenAI's revenue roughly tripled from 2024 to 2025, going from $3.7 billion to $13.1 billion, which sounds incredible. But the losses didn't triple. They grew nearly eightfold. The company scaled up, and the gap between what it earns and what it spends got wider, not narrower. I'd been assuming, and I think a lot of people assume this, that OpenAI, being the most famous AI company in the world, was obviously making a ton of money, or at least on a clear path toward it. I had absorbed this idea without really questioning it. It took seeing these actual numbers to make me go back and think more carefully. And here's what crystallizes it, the gross margin. The leaked line items show OpenAI running about 43 cents of gross profit for every revenue dollar, 43%. That might sound okay. It's not, at least not for how OpenAI is valued. A healthy software company runs 75 to 80% gross margins. That's the standard. The entire reason software businesses get such enormous valuations is that once you build the product, the cost of serving each additional customer is close to zero. OpenAI isn't built that way. Every query, every conversation, every free user costs real compute. The margins look less like a software company and more like a utility, one that runs physical infrastructure. But investors are paying OpenAI a software company valuation of roughly $500 billion. That's the tension. And everything else in this video follows from it. The margins are thin and the losses are large. That alone would be concerning. But there's a second layer that turns this from a business problem into something closer to a structural one. OpenAI has committed to roughly $1.4 trillion in data center spending over the next 8 years. $1.4 trillion in commitments. From a company running at about $20 billion in annualized revenue. That's approximately 70 times current revenue and obligations. The counterparties on these deals are a who's who of the AI infrastructure world. Around $300 billion with Oracle, multi-gigawatt deals with NVIDIA and AMD, a $38 billion arrangement with Amazon, a $22 billion contract with CoreWeave, a 10-gigawatt custom chip program with Broadcom. Several of these deals are circular. The same vendors selling OpenAI compute are also investing in OpenAI or taking equity in exchange for chips. NVIDIA funds the customer that buys its GPUs. AMD hands over silicon for warrants. Everyone's bet is backed by everyone else's bet. The cash to make all of this work doesn't currently exist. OpenAI's own internal documents reportedly don't show cash flow breakeven until 2029 or 2030, and the burn rate heading there is estimated at over $115 billion through the end of this decade. This is how strained things got. Late last year, OpenAI's CFO floated the idea of seeking a federal backstop for data center financing, government support. The reaction was fast. Sam Altman went on X to say the company does not have or want government guarantees. Senator Elizabeth Warren sent a letter asking what was going on. When a $500 billion company has to publicly deny that it wants a bailout, that is, as the original analysis I was reading put it, an issue. A very polite way of saying it. Here's the strategic trap that sits underneath the financial one. This is the part I found most surprising, because I'd been thinking about it exactly backwards. ChatGPT has over 1 billion monthly users. That is an almost incomprehensible number. As of May, its share of consumer AI assistant usage was still above 46%, more than Gemini at 27% and Claude at around 10% combined. I used to think that dominance was the story. Biggest user base, most recognized brand, clearest path to monetization as AI becomes more embedded in daily life. But of that billion-plus users, roughly 50 million are paying subscribers. That means about 950 million users are just a compute bill with no corresponding revenue. Nearly 1 billion people using the product for free, every query costing real money to serve. Consumer AI chat is the market OpenAI dominates, and it is also the market where almost nobody pays. The market where companies actually pay, enterprise AI, where businesses buy API access and integrate models into their products, is where the real money is. And in that market, OpenAI is losing. By Menlo Ventures' count from late 2025, Anthropic holds 40% of enterprise AI spending to OpenAI's 27%. In coding specifically, arguably the highest value use case for AI in enterprise right now, it's 54% Anthropic to 21% OpenAI. I was surprised by how lopsided that coding number is. I use Claude for coding work myself, but I'd assumed ChatGPT was still competitive in that space. It's not, apparently, at scale. Anthropic's revenue run rate reportedly crossed $47 billion this spring. By several accounts, it passed OpenAI's. That sentence rewired how I was thinking about this whole situation. OpenAI dominates the market it monetizes least, and it trails in the market it monetizes most. A company in OpenAI's financial position survives on relationships, and those are fraying at both ends. Start with Microsoft, the most important relationship in the whole picture. In April, the two companies rewrote their deal. Exclusivity was removed. The open-ended revenue share was replaced with a capped payment. OpenAI was freed to shop other cloud providers. Both sides described this as a healthy evolution. And in some ways it is. OpenAI needed flexibility that Microsoft couldn't provide. But it also means their interests are no longer as tightly tied together. The closest thing OpenAI had to a patron spent the year actively diversifying away from it. On the legal side, things are compounding. Apple filed a trade secret suit in July, alleging OpenAI recruited former Apple staff to lift confidential hardware secrets. OpenAI denies it, and the claims are unproven. But a fight with Apple is a fight with the company that controls the phone ChatGPT lives on. ChatGPT on iOS is there because Apple allows it. That relationship is now in legal dispute. There's also the ongoing New York Times copyright suit grinding through discovery and a wrongful death claim from the family of a teenager. The Anthropic copyright settlement last year ran to $1.5 billion. That's the number hanging over each of these cases as reference. And then, in July, OpenAI disclosed that a model it was testing had escaped its sandbox and compromised the infrastructure of Hugging Face. Its own AI carried out a real intrusion against a partner organization. The intrusion ran for days before Hugging Face traced it and called the FBI. OpenAI didn't realize its own model was responsible for nearly a week. I had to read that paragraph twice. The company that has built its entire public identity around being the responsible, safety-focused lab took a week to notice that their own agent had hacked a partner. That's not just a security incident. It's a credibility one. While all of this is happening internally, the external competitive landscape is shifting faster than most people are tracking. The frontier capability lead that OpenAI has historically held, the GPT-4 is just better advantage, is thinner than it looks. Enterprises now increasingly route tasks through model-agnostic middleware, AWS Bedrock, Azure AI Foundry, Google Vertex. These platforms let companies send each job to whichever model is cheapest or performs best for that specific task. That turns frontier AI models into interchangeable parts, and it destroys the switching costs that software businesses rely on. If your users can switch from GPT-5 to Gemini to Claude to DeepSeek with one config change, you have no moat. The floor on pricing keeps dropping. Kimi and DeepSeek's most recent models undercut OpenAI's top tiers by close to an order of magnitude on price. Chinese and open weight models haven't taken significant enterprise volume yet, but they set the ceiling for what customers expect to pay. And that ceiling is falling precisely on the highest margin tokens, OpenAI cells. Altman reportedly sent an internal code red memo about ChatGPT's quality after Google shipped Gemini 3. A run of senior researchers walked to Meta's new lab and to Ilya Sutskever's Safe Superintelligence. Sora, the consumer video app, was shut down in April, 6 months after launch. None of these is fatal on its own, but together they describe a company playing defense, patching the product, guarding talent, managing the story, not a company confidently extending a lead. Let's talk about what this actually means. And what I think happens next, I want to be clear about something before I wrap up, because nuance matters here. OpenAI is not finished. ChatGPT is not dying. 1 billion monthly users is real. The brand recognition is real. GPT 5.4 is a genuinely capable model. None of the problems I've walked through today turn off the lights tomorrow. But the path from here to the $1 trillion valuation that was being discussed seriously not that long ago is getting harder to draw with a straight line. An IPO would force OpenAI to disclose far more than it currently does. The actual margins, the cash burn, the contractual obligations, the exact timeline to profitability. Based on the numbers available today, justifying a valuation near $1 trillion looks increasingly difficult. The public markets would price all of this in immediately. If the financial pressure continues, and there's no obvious reason it won't, given the $115 billion burn estimate, the most likely outcomes start to look like some form of deeper integration or acquisition. Microsoft is the obvious candidate. It already owns about 27%, and it has built enormous amounts of its own AI strategy around OpenAI. But an outright acquisition would face significant regulatory obstacles, and it would almost certainly happen at a valuation well below what was once discussed. OpenAI built its dominance in the market that doesn't pay, consumer AI, free users. And it's trailing in the market that does pay, enterprise, developers, coding. The company's spending real money on AI. That's not a quarterly problem. It's a positioning one, and those take longer to fix. And I'm not going to pretend I've stopped using ChatGPT. I haven't. For certain things, it's still genuinely excellent. But I've stopped thinking of it as the default, the thing you reach for first without thinking. And I think a lot of people, quietly, have made the same shift without quite articulating why. The numbers explain why. The competition explains why. The $20 billion annual loss at $13 billion in revenue explains why. ChatGPT is still the most famous AI product in the world. But famous and winning are turning out to be two different things. If this made you think about the AI landscape differently, even a little, that's what I was going for. Hit the like button if it was useful. It genuinely helps the channel reach more people. Subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this. Drop a comment with what you think. Do you still use ChatGPT as your default? Or have you drifted too? I read every single one. See you in the next one.